Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Invisible Histories Project Talks, where we sit down and still shelter in place, regardless of what some people are saying, and chat with cool folks that we think are doing amazing work in queer and trans history, archiving, and community organizing. I'm Megan Sullivan, she, her, hers, and I'm here with my colleague,
Josh Burford, he, him, his.
and as usual, we're going to let our host, or our guest, we are the host, introduce herself. So if you could just tell us your name, your pronouns, where you work, what you do, and any other, cool tidbits that we would need to know before we get going.
Yeah, so I'm Jonah Lacqua, she, her, hers. I'm the executive director of the History Project documenting LGBTQ Boston. We're community archives in Boston, Massachusetts.
So when did you guys get started with your project?
So we got started in 1980. It's our 40th anniversary this year.
Congratulations. That's exciting.
Yeah, we had a little party before all this started. So it was kind of like our last hurrah before we all went into lockdown. We had a little tea party to celebrate. But yeah, the story
that doesn't feel very Boston at all. That's not on the nose, not a bit.
We didn't even make that connection. We were like, we're gonna have a pink tea. It's gonna be fun. Big pink cake. It was very, very themed.
Okay, well, we're gonna just have to do one of those. Our tea will be sweetened, but I'm here for the pink tea and the pink cake all day.
Oh yeah, our tea was alcoholic, so.
Yes.
But yeah, so we got started, a group of activists, historians, and archivists got together to talk about, at the time they were calling it lesbian and gay history, about the lack of it, about the trying to figure out where it was in history. And at the time it was Boston's 350th anniversary, so they got a tiny grant from the city to start doing it. They put together a slideshow, and then 40 years later, here we are.
Nice. Now, do you guys have a physical location that houses your collection?
Yeah, so we have an office in Back Bay in Boston. It's one of the neighborhoods. Boston is a city of neighborhoods, so we're in the Back Bay neighborhood. We're right by the train. I usually wayfind us by saying we're down the alley from Club Cafe, which is one of the few gay bars we have left in Boston. So yeah, so we have a physical space where we house most of our collections, where we do events, where researchers come and use collections, where volunteers process, and then we have a little bit of offsite storage for some bigger things and some exhibits and stuff.
So this is going to seem like a silly question considering Boston is over 350 years old, but like how old is your history that you've been able to locate?
Yeah, so in terms of stories and evidence we've been able to find, that predates Boston. So Native American communities in New England have evidence of what we would now call queer people and queer relationships. And then in Boston itself, starting with the Puritans, laws against sodomy and buggery and all those other fun things were there. So showing that people were at least, I guess we would call it hooking up now and getting caught. Yeah, within our actual collections, our earliest materials date to about World War II. Again, talking about tea parties, we have photos of sailors on leave during World War II who were going to private tea parties in houses around Boston.
Nice.
I know this is an aside, but can we bring buggery back?
Can we?
Delightful. I full love it.
Oh yeah.
Just a bit of buggery. In fact, somebody needs to make an app. I'm just saying.
It gives me the same hankering for sodomite.
Yeah.
Look, I've been looking into your project, and kind of the stuff that you guys were doing, and I'm wondering, this is kind of a much broader question, but I want to know why Boston in particular, considering how old it is, considering it was a part of the original 13 colonies, right? There's so much history there. Why is Boston so markedly left out of a national conversation about queer organizing and history? Because you get New York, Stonewall, fine. You get Chicago, Henry Gerber, that makes sense. You get the West Coast because of San Francisco. But why Boston? Why are you guys left out of this conversation?
I think it's interesting. I think we have a Boston and New York have that like sibling kind of relationship, where New Yorkers see Boston as like trying to be New York but not quite there.
Yeah.
But also, I think a lot of the people who did things in Boston move on to places like New York and San Francisco. We have, let's see, the first openly, Elaine Noble, who's the first openly gay member, a person elected to a political office in the country, I think. For a historian, my details and my dates are a little shaky. But yeah, she was very early, 1970s, and worked with Barney Frank, who later came out, was in the closet when he first was elected. We had Gay Community News, which was 1973, which ended up starting as a community newsletter and became a national publication. And I mean, and we also are the first state to legalize same-sex marriage, which is 2004. So a lot of things are happening in Boston, but I think also the queer movement in a lot of ways is a local movement. Things happen on a national scale, things happen where we all get together, but it's like different people are making different strides in Boston than they were in New York or in Atlanta or in New Orleans, or every story is a little bit different. So we're part of that conversation, but yeah, I don't know why we're not at the forefront of it.
Yeah, because I mean, you're right. Back in the mid '90s, early 2000s, when the argument was being held between civil unions and same-sex marriage, like Massachusetts is right at the front. They're like, we'll do civil unions, no problem, and then we'll do same-sex marriage, 2004, and then everyone I knew was flocking to Boston to get married, no matter what. But yeah, you're right. Like there are these little brief moments that you're there, but I never really thought about it until this week, how often I feel like Boston in particular, despite its size and despite its history, gets as left out of a conversation nationally about the queer community as so many places in the Deep South get left out, considering, we were organizing right along, right a year after the Stonewall riots, which I'm sure you were, considering your proximity. Gay Community News started in Boston?
Yeah. So it started in 1973. They started meeting in the Charles Street Meeting House, which at the time was sort of a de facto gay community center in a lot of ways. It was a church, but also they had a gay crisis hotline out of there. And basically this collective came together to create what was originally was the Gay Community Newsletter. And I think that lasted either a week or 2 weeks. It was a really short amount of time. And then they started publishing as Gay Community News. And they kept at it in Boston until the 90s. With the exact date, they sort of peter off after a while, but yeah, they were here the whole time, and there's still folks who come to History Project events and say, "Oh, I remember you from GCN. I remember stuffing envelopes with you on Friday afternoon. How's it going?"
Well, I don't want to get hate mail from gays in Boston, but I swear I thought Gay Community News was from New York. And so I apologize profusely to all the gay people in Boston for having that assumption. Because we got a donation very early on in Invisible Histories from a collector in Mobile. And we have a very solid run of Gay Community News here in Birmingham that he'd been collecting, I think, since the mid 70s. Mm-hmm. It's a really good paper.
Yeah, they were, it's interesting because they were talking about things that were happening locally in Boston. And there are stories of actually one of the women's bars, and I believe it was the Saints, but someone's going to come out of the woodwork and tell me it was somewhere, or vice versa, would put in just their advertisement in Gay Community News was the Saints, a woman's place or something like that, with a phone number, and you had to call to learn what the address was. And so they were doing local things like that to sort of protect the community and protect each other, but also they were talking about things happening nationally. I know when the lounge fire happened in New Orleans, Gay Communities held a drive to raise money to send down to support funerals. They were very tapped in. conjecturing, I sort of wonder if it's because we have so many schools up here that, you know, people got involved while they were in college and then moved on to other things, or they're coming from other places and thinking about sort of a national movement and national events while they're in Boston, or what, I'm not sure. But yeah, it was a local newspaper with national reach.
Yeah. Well, so I wonder, so you guys just hit your 40, and so this is such a, I feel like in some ways it's such a dumb question, but like, how different is the project now than it was envisioned from the beginning? Because you said like it was like a group of people got together. That's what happened with us. You get together, you're like, let's do this thing. We're like, hell yeah, let's do this thing, and we'll make it happen. But how different is the project now than it was, 20, 30 years ago?
Yeah, I think one thing that stayed the same, it's always been very grassroots, very volunteer driven. And even now, so I'm the organization's only employee, or I'm our first full-time employee. But we try to listen to the community, to talk with them and to better understand what they want and need from us. And we are an archives of the community and for the community. So we started at a time where institutional archives, university archives were collecting queer materials but hiding that it was queer or destroying things. And that's totally changed. We have great relationships with a lot of the archives in Boston. But at the time, it was really us worrying that, if we were going to document the movement as it was happening, we wanted to make sure that it was safe and accessible to the people who were involved with it. That's part of why we've stayed independent now. But at the very beginning, we weren't collecting anything. We were just researching. And that changed really slowly over time. In the last couple of years, we've gained a lot of collections. We're up to almost 200 now. And
wow, awesome.
Yeah, and we collect, our collection policy for archives nerds is very broad. It's basically LGBTQ history about Boston, but that means Massachusetts and New England. And basically we collect a lot of ephemera in addition to actual records that people have created and saved about organizations they were involved with or movements they were involved with. So we have, drag queen dresses and hats and barware and pins and t-shirts and all that sort of stuff that tells you about the queer experience that's not just written down.
So
go ahead.
What does the process look like? Are y'all like actively reaching out to folks? Do they come to you? Do you have volunteers contacting people? Like if I was in Boston and I had a collection, like what would that look like?
Yeah, it depends. So I'm trying to think of some examples. So it really depends on what's going on. If we hear, like, for instance, that an organization is closing, or that we know someone's retiring, or somebody's moving into a retirement home, or, moving to Florida or something, which it happens up here. People eventually go south. We will reach out to those people in particular and say, hey, as you're working on packing up and going, we're here and we can help you look at the stuff that you've collected. We can let you know if we think it should go into an archives. We can let you know if we should take it or if you should go to some other repository, depending on what you've hung on to, and that sort of outreach. A lot of times, though, we hear from people who they shoot us an email, they come to an event. Sometimes they just drop things in the mail, and you have a little note that says, here's this stack of magazines I've hung on to. Do you guys want it? So it's a little bit reactionary sometimes. And we keep most of the things that are donated to us. And by, I mean, things is a vague term, but in terms of like publications, we have extra copies of GCN. Sometimes if we have more than one copy of a book, we might remove that from the collection, but for the most part, things that come to us stay in the archives. We catalog them and we make them available. So yeah, it's a little bit, I used to work in academic archives where we had a couple of acquisitions archivists, we had people embedded in schools. It was a much more streamlined process, and we're really letting the community and who knows about us guide how we're collecting things. To that end, we do try to partner with other organizations around Boston to make sure that we are interacting with people that aren't just coming to us because they're interested in history. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, because if you just let the historians come, you're only getting one story.
Right. It's what's funny to me about, like, it's funny to me always that we've created this false hierarchy between, like, historians with a big H, right? So like people with letters after their names, and then historians with a small h for people who are interested in history or whatever. And so, but we get just as much traffic from big H historian PhDs than we do from people in the community that are doing a research project or just curious or had a coming out experience in a bar and like want to see pictures inside that bar. I think you're right, that balance between the two is super important. So I'm curious about so many things, but let me start with my first question. What does your space actually look like?
So we rent space in a building where the main tenant is the Boston Living Center. They are an organization that provides services to people with HIV and AIDS. So they do lunch a few times a week, they do support groups, so they do testing and that sort of thing. So we're in a queer building. And we rent most of the fourth floor. We started with literally a closet in about the year 2000, and we've expanded over time to take over most of the floor. So a couple of rooms are storage. We have an event space that has a TV and some paintings. We can have about 20 people in there, and our Out of the Archive series takes place in that room. So it's very intimate, which is a lot of fun. It means that whoever's presenting has an opportunity to talk to the audience and to hear about their experiences or what they remembered or hear what kind of questions they want to know more about. And then our main sort of office space is part collections, part research library, part processing. And so you're surrounded by queer history. We have over 1,000 books. I don't know if they've all been cataloged, that are on the walls all around you. There's old exhibit materials. There are displays of buttons and other ephemera, and a big rainbow flag. My favorite thing, and maybe I can find a picture for you all, we have this big, huge photo of somebody pretending to be the logo from a local leather bar. And it's Mr. Leather, and he's kind of in the background sort of surveying everything as you're working on your collection. So it's really it's not the same as stepping into like a really staid research environment. You're surrounded by the community's materials when you're looking through a box of materials about a bar.
I like that you say you're surrounded by queer materials, because it feels both inviting and welcoming and aggressive and threatening, which is I think that perfect balance that we always like to strive for. So I appreciate that verbiage.
Yeah.
And I'm delighted at how much our projects have in common, because we are also in a queer building that is also providing HIV/AIDS outreach. That is a big shout out to our colleagues at AIDS Alabama for so much support for helping us get on our feet and allowing us to work with them. But I think you're right. To me, that feels like what a grassroots queer project like this should be doing, right? Like embedded in the institutions of our communities. And it would be too distracting for us to have an office in a bar. In the deep south. I mean, y'all can talk about drinking all you want, but happy hour in Alabama starts at 2:00. So, like, we love to drink here. So you guys are on this trajectory. You're the first full-time staff member in the project. Like, where do you guys have a plan for the next decade? Like, is there, are you wanting more staff? Are you wanting more space, more stuff?
I mean, it's everything. We want it all. And it's hard to plan. I mean, in this moment right now where things are very, distanced, it's hard to plan for the future. But I would love a space that is even more accessible to the community. Because right now we have exhibits that we can rent out or put up in other spaces. We don't have like a permanent exhibit. Our hours right now are really based around when volunteers are in the archive. So there are a couple of days that I'm there all day and available. but mostly we have a couple of nights when volunteers are there and researchers can come in, and then most of Saturday. So having another place where, you know, somebody coming to town could come in, look at an exhibit, talk to someone, check out this material that like is in the archives now, but has been part of the community for so long that it should be seen and interacted with, is my dream. In terms of, you know, 10-year, 5-year strategic planning, I'm not sure when that'll come to fruition, but that would be the goal. And right now too, we think a lot, and I'm sure you're in the same boat, people who were involved with the first part, the first part of like the public LGBTQ movement are retiring, are moving, are finally getting around to clearing out the stuff they've had in an attic for 40 years. And so our collecting has gone up so much in the last few years as people are making those strides and are looking at their own lives as part of this history. And so I envision that we will have even more collections than we do now as time goes on. So yeah, there's one of the things that we've been planning and trying to find funding for actually, is that we really want to scan and make available the transgender history materials that we have. We have a collection called, oh man, it's the International Coalition on Gender, International Commission on Gender. All right, I'll have to find you the exact name. But we have these materials that are part of trans history that I just think need to be scanned and digitized and available through something like the Transgender Digital Archives. Yeah. So the people who are at home or who are in Boston can really get a sense of what people have been doing for a very long time, how they've been connecting and interacting and figuring out their identity and that sort of thing. So that's, you know, all this is on the back burner while we're stuck at home, but
right.
Yeah, but the work goes on. So we still plan, we still hope, we still move forward.
Well, and I'm wondering too, you know, so we've already found the connection, several connections between your project and ours. And now I'm wondering if we shouldn't be sending one of our students up to your archive to see what kind of materials about the Deep South that you have that we could, because one of the goals of IHP, you know, we're in 3 states now collecting, and we're working with the Queer History South network. So we're trying to keep us connected to people doing the work as we can. But one of the things we want to do is figure out a way that we can push people into collections that may not have as large a digital profile as someone like, you know, the LGBT Historical Society or the One Archives. You know, we want to be able to do those connections too. And so I'm always fascinated by what we might have that reflects your history, and, you know, and vice versa.
Yeah, and that's off the top of my head, I don't know. We have these really, they're kind of an archivist, I think, nightmare, but they're the most fascinating bit of history. We have these subject files that volunteers have been adding to for years and years, and they document all sorts of things, like little organizations that pop up and disappear, protests against everything, this, that, and the other thing. But they range from things that are happening sort of locally in Boston to international issues. And I wonder, that would be the place where I would look to see what sort of Deep South stuff we might have. So I wouldn't be surprised.
Thinking about that, you know, while people are at home, like they should be, what are there any materials that y'all do have online, or is there a good place where people can check out, you know, more about you, things that y'all got?
Yeah, so the first stop's our website, historyproject.org, and that's where our projects, our events, exhibits that we have made digital and put online are available. So that's a good first stop. And then we have what we call Documented. It's our Omeka instance. It's a digital repository. And sort of various things are scanned and online there. The actually biggest collection we have on there was a project we did a couple of years ago, where we took these memorial scrapbooks that a man had donated in the 90s, and he had been cutting obituaries out of people who predominantly died of AIDS or other related issues, but also just gay people or people who he thought were gay. And he has, there's either 27 or 28 of these scrapbooks. And so volunteers scanned them all, OCR'd them, and put them up on Omeka. So you can go through and look from A to Z,
Wow.
get a sense of that. And they're called the Robert Quinn Memorial Scrapbooks. So that's our biggest digital collection. And then we're working on Queer Archives at Home right now, which is really a social media project. I think so much of our history and our experience are things that surround us every day. Like I was saying, our archives has a lot of ephemera. So t-shirts, buttons, flyers, posters, things that you've picked up and saved over the years, and we're asking people to submit them to our digital archives so that we can share it, so that we can sort of connect in a way digitally to get a better understanding of what other members in our community were part of, what they were interested in, and that sort of thing. And it's been really fun, actually, to see what people have hung on to. I put a shirt up back when I was a volunteer with the History Project. I designed our Pride shirt one year. And so I put up a picture of the shirt, and it's actually my wife's shirt, because mine I cut into like a tiny little tank top. She still wears hers. So the full version is up there online.
Well, so if folks wanted to, participate in the Archiving at Home, social media campaign, what would they need to do? Where's that happening? How do they get involved?
Yeah, it's super easy. It's basically we're asking for a photograph of something that you have around you, whether that's, like I said, clothing or a book or a photo that you could tell a story about. And then we're asking them to submit it. We have a little Google form that they can fill out on our website and connect the photo with the Google form, send it to us. We'll add it to our repository and share it on our social media. But also, if you hashtag Queer Archives at Home on Instagram or Twitter, we've been reposting and retweeting those submissions too. Because part of it's about collecting these things and putting them one place so you can see them and interact with them. And the other part of it is just, what do you have? What tells your story? How are you part of this community? And I think that's the really important part of it, because we're not just talking about people who were involved in the 70s or 80s or 90s. We're asking people now, what do you consider your queer story and your queer history?
Yeah, and we'll definitely be posting ours, because we've obviously got some things around. So we'll do ours too, and we'll link to all of this in the description box so that folks can get involved, can share things. We'll link to your Instagram and your Twitter and all that good stuff. Josh, do you have any other questions?
No, that's super cool. I'm excited about pushing people to posting their stuff they have at home. I'm thinking over my shoulder right here. Oh, wait, I don't know how to make my finger work. Right here is a poster from a queer zine project that I worked on back in the early 2000s, and I would love to snap that and tag our partners in that.
That would be so cool. We had actually, I think they're from Canada. One of our first submissions was a stack of zines somebody had hung on to from their time in Canada involved with queer movements up there.
Nice.
So it's it's international. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, are there any last tidbits, any things that we should know before we go?
I think we're all in the same boat. We're, like I said, we're a volunteer-driven archives, and we're doing our best right now to keep everyone connected and to be at least a digital space for our community while we're all social distancing. And I agree, well, we should be social distancing. So yeah, I hope that we can continue to be that sort of resource for the community in a space where we're not just talking about history, but about each other.
Oh, that is the most heartwarming thing that I have heard in a while, because we're not getting a lot of heartwarming stuff right now. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us. And it was great. Make sure that you follow folks. You follow the Boston Project on Instagram. All the links will be below, and we will see y'all next time.